Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Emet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on day 616. It's a kind of sphira. I'm quoting from the Sphira website, Sphira 710. Hayom 616 yom, shehem shana achat, shmona chodashim, v'shisha yamim b'choshech. Today is 616 days, 1 year, 8 months, and 6 days of darkness. Yehi ratzon sheyishamru ahuveinu v'yinatzlu mipnei mevakshe ra'atam. May it be God's will that our loved ones be saved from those who seek evil upon them. V'yachseru b'mira le'or beitam b'shalom u'vivriut. Let them be returned speedily to the light of their homes in peace and in health. Amen. Amen. We start
Amen.
mindful of the captivity, 616 days, as we turn to Parashat Beha'lotkha, which all these parshas, as we know from this show, are amazing parshas. What I think is defining in this parsha is that there are several things to talk about, several stories, several little stories. We could certainly focus on the things prior, the beginning of the parsha that deals with the menorah, the Levites, the preparations for departure. We have the quote that we recite all the time when we take the Torah out and put the Torah back, which is something that we are familiar with. Vayiben So'aron Vayomer Moshe, right? The song of the Ark. With your permission, I'd love to focus on one of the little stories, and then we'll devote the second half to another story, which is, we get a redux here of Moses and his father-in-law. Now, we first met Moses and his father-in-law in the parsha named for his father-in-law Yitro, right after the Exodus. Vayishma Yitro, he hears what God has done for the Israelites, and he comes running, I think, in a tremendous sense of genuine joy and affection. In that story, there is a departure. After, of course, Yitro giving Moses advice as to how to organize the judiciary, and one gets the impression that Yitro is a kind of senior statesman person, an individual who is wise, respected, reverential, etc. But he has his own stature. He goes back to his home. In this version, or in this episode or scene, he is still here, and he has a different name. His name is Chovav. And of course, the commentaries are divided as to, maybe they're two individuals, maybe it's whatever. Let's assume that it's Chovav, another name for Yitro. And it says in chapter 10, verse 29, Moses says to him, Nosim anachnu el hamakom asher amar Adonai. We're going to the place that God has said, Oto eten lachem, I'm giving it to you. So he says, Lecha itanu, come with us. Ve'tavnu lach, we'll make it good for you.
Make it worth your while.
Exactly. Because God has made good promises to Israel. Okay? So here Yitro says to him, Lo elech, not going. Ki em el artzi ve'el amolati elech. And Moses then implores him. He says, Al na ta'azov otanu, don't leave us. Ki al ken yadati chanotenu b'midbar, Ki al ken yadati, I'm sorry, you know how to camp in the desert. Vayita lanu le'inayim, you can be our eyes. And he says, Moses, we're going to make it good for you. Don't worry. And it doesn't tell us what happened. It doesn't tell us if he stays or if he goes. And there are schools of opinion on both sides of this. Some say, oh yeah, he was convinced and he stayed with them. And some say he left. The people that say that he was staying, there's rabbinic tradition and a lot of commentary, including Nachmanides. They say because we have a reference to a group of descendants of the Canaanites that are, related to this individual Chovav, they settle in the land. And then there's a group that says, I don't think so. He goes home. And I want to say, I think I'm part of the minority group here because I think the majority says that he,
As you often are, Elliot, we should point out.
as we should point out, that he goes home, and I think he goes home because I'm critical of Moses. Moses, as skilled as he is a leader, he is not as skilled as a a diplomat, a diplomat,
Diplomat.
a diplomat. I almost wanted to say, you know, he is a good, solid executive, but not a terribly good pastor. He doesn't have a kind way with people.
Maybe he's better with sheep.
And there's a point to be made there because, you know, he if he really I, I keep thinking like there are 100 different ways to make a pitch to someone to join your group without making them feel alienated. I'm reading very, very microscopically at what he says. He says, "We're going, and so come with us." Right? Nosim anachnu means we. There's a group, we. You're not part of that group. You're differentiated. You're not in that club yet. Okay. And we're going to the play. I'll leave the whole discussion about the place for a second. He says, L'chai tanu, come with us. Ve'tavnu, we will make it good for you. Ki Adonai diber tov al Yisrael. God has made, spoken promise good for Israel. So the message that he receives in this is, you're really not one of us. And you know what? You're still on the outside of the boundary here. Now, Moses is related to him. This is Moses's father. Moses is married to his daughter. Moses is the father of this man's grandchildren. But this man, Chovav Yitro, is not an Israelite, and he will never be an Israelite. Instead, Moses doesn't say to him, "We love you, we honor you. You have meant so much to us. You have the minute you heard of what God did for us, you came and joined us. And
So maybe
we could never express enough appreciation. You know what? You are us. So let's go together, right?
so maybe you could explain why you think this story is in the Torah. What is the point it's trying to make?
I think there's a deeper story here, and the story is about belonging, and the story is about a stage of how boundaries of identity are constructed in the Torah already at this point. And what you have here is Moses, a leader, and a people defined by their experiences that their their shared uh, core of experiences of Exodus, of war, of miracles, of the sea, and everything that has gone up until this point, and of course the revelation at Sinai. And here's a man who hasn't had those experiences. And so you say to this person who hasn't shared in these experiences, well, I want you to, come with us. You're always going to be different. You're always going to be outsider. Okay.
Yeah, so what I think about more as I get older is that each of the books of the Torah seem to want to tell its own story, not necessarily connected with the other books. And you mentioned the story in Shemot, where at the end of the story, Moses sends Yitro away. And that would seem to be part of the main point of that story, is that Moses, in a sense, sends his father-in-law back to his home because he's not part of him. But here, as you mentioned, there we don't really know what happens, although it seems likely that he does leave because the last word he says is, I want to go home. And so we can assume that he goes home right afterwards. But I, I'm not sure what this is trying to say. But the other point I wanted to make is that what we have here are bits of information that help us unpack other parts of the Torah story. So we know that the land of Israel has 7 nations, and Midian is not one of the 7 nations from the land, and neither are the Kenites, and both of them are going to later become involved with the Israelite people. And it seems like it might be a way of explaining how these other groups of people who are in the same area have their own traditions of interacting with the Israelites, not the nations that have to be destroyed because they're part of the original Israel.
Right. I agree with you. I think there's a conversation to be had about the geography, that if you want to say the geopolitics, all the relationships of all the different nations, tribes, groups, clans, etc., within the land at the time. And I like that conversation a lot. But I'm intrigued by the relationships here, and by the I'm reminded, I don't have any better examples of this, but the scenes in Annie Hall where he's talking, and there are subtitles there, and the subtitles are what he really thinks. Okay. And so what we get, Alvy's singer, right? Yeah, he's and what I read here is an exchange of it's a pitch and a response. And when there's a negotiation of that kind, there's really a subtext. And the subtext is honor. And I can't help, in this reading, but feel offended. Okay? Because if I were Chovav Yitro and I loved the Jewish people and I was in solidarity with you and I came running when I heard the miracle happen and I wanted to be with you and I celebrated with you and I had a feast with you and I, shared your tribulations and challenges, and then you said, come with me, we'll make it good for you. I'd say, that I'm insulted by that. You think you want to pay me? You think I came because I wanted something out of it for? You think I came because I want to gain gold and silver and land? I came because of a genuine feeling of affection for you, and you're offering me a, 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 a bribe, basically.
So you
Yeah,
feel
but the
like
way you
you
go ahead,
feel
Joe.
like that insult had the effect of making Yitro less anxious to remain.
I think it's basically says to him, you'll forgive me. What the hell am I doing here? Okay.
But the way you set up the story is that what defines the Israelite are these core experiences, of which Jethro only heard about. He was not a participant in them. So
Indeed.
how could he ever think he could belong?
Do you know? Okay.
So, but the counterpoint to this is that we like to read biblical criticism, is that in fact there are many biblical scholars who think that various tribes or tribal elements took upon themselves stories that they were not actually a part of and became Israelites just by adopting the story. So that should have been available to Yitro as well, no?
And
I
and let me first of all, I think narratively speaking, uh, I think you're I think it is most likely that he does go back because in Exodus 18, which also tells the story of Moses and his father-in-law, that story concludes with, and then he sent his father-in-law away.
right.
So it seems like these two stories, they could be two totally different stories, but
They have to talk to each
that
other.
it seems more likely that these are both vantage points on a single story, and that the end of it has Yitro leaving. But I just don't know the level of religious implication. Um, I'm a little hesitant to think, on a couple of grounds, that there's a kind of exclusivist. It yields you a somewhat exclusivist uh, uh, definition of Am Yisrael, that whether it's because you really had to have been there, you can't just have heard about it. Not only would that exclude Yitro, that would exclude you and me because I didn't experience it. I only heard about it, but I have taken it onto my own. If Yitro, and furthermore, that we know that there's an Erev Rav, and at a minimum, and Moses was willing to let the Erev Rav come along. Moses clearly wants him to stay. Moses clearly wants him to be part of this journey. So I feel like the key thing is that Yitro, like there's somebody who's been coming to the synagogue who um, did not grow up Jewish, and I just inquired if the person. I was in a subtle way. It wasn't in a mean way, and I just inquired about, you know, whether she had ever formally converted or wanted to convert. And I said, listen, if you would like to formally convert, I would love to help you. And the person has it may be unrelated, because this person's a student, maybe she's, her term ended or something like that. But I haven't seen her in a few weeks, and it makes me wonder whether she heard me saying, "Listen, you have to choose. You either have to be a part of this, or you're not really welcome here," which I certainly hope I did not.
So I think that this is the real story. The real story is a story of the other and the way the other is. Well, I mean, look, we're fresh off of Shavuot, a week and a half ago, and Shavuot is the paradigm of the other coming into Israel. And she said, and Ruth is not less than maybe half a dozen generations after this, and or not more. And she says, Amech, Ami, Elohayich, Elohai, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your God, your people are my people. Your God is my God. Now we can argue, of course, that this is a different kind of situation, but she makes the leap of solidarity with the people. She says, I share in your experiences. Now, here's the difference, I think, or the issue that needs to be teased out. Yitro did not share in the plague experience, did not share in the Exodus experience, did not share in the splitting of the sea experience, did not share in the Mount Sinai experience and the Amalek experience and all the things that happen right now. Is there room for him still, even with the love? And so what Moses is saying is, he's not saying it in the way that you or I would say it, okay? But Yitro is hearing, I'm gathering here that because I don't share your story, I'm not in. And we would say it differently. We say you can anyone can have the story. That's the genius of the rabbinizing of the biblical tradition is that you want it, it's yours. You do need to make a commitment. You need to accept, whatever the mitzvot. You need to accept Ol Malchut Shamayim, God's sovereignty. Um, but once you've done, you stood at Sinai too. It's a brilliant move that we.
So to return to Jeremy's comment, when we celebrate the Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrimage festivals, that's when we buy into the story. That's when we make the story ours. And we sometimes forget that Jethro had this sacred meal with Moses.
Yeah,
So he could have been brought into the story, I think. And
I
the
think
question then is why he does not.
And one thing that I would float about this, which just has, I think, interesting implications for our world. Um, Jews have never, we've always said, tzadikei umot haolam yesh lehem chelek leolam haba. Gentile righteous people also have a stake in the world to come. We have never said, uh, as much as Jewish tradition elevates Judaism and Bachar banu mikol amim, and we are some level of selected for God's own Torah that other nations don't have. But we have never thought that Judaism is the one and only exclusive path that everybody should take. You can worship, even in a shocking statement in Tractate Menachot in the Talmud. It says every idol worshiper knows that there is a God of gods behind their idol. And for the Gemara to even recognize that polytheism or idol worship can still be, the human worshiper can still be thinking about Hashem, Allah, the one of the one. Um, I could imagine, I think that's a pretty bold thing. I could imagine Yitro saying some version of, not in addition to the things we're saying about the story being the story, the experiences being the experience, firsthand or secondhand or third hand. I could imagine him saying, like to transpose this into a contemporary uh, thing. I have a recent convert who grew up Hindu, and I'm never going to have Diwali again. I can imagine, the potential Muslim convert saying, "Wait, I love Ramadan. I love Eid al-Fitr. I'm never going to have those things again. You know what? You have a great religion, Gesundheit hate, and we have one
Christians say
too."
that
And
all the time. They love
I,
Christmas. I mean,
I could imagine somebody saying, Yitro, listen, I'm Kohen Midyan. Every year I get up on our special day and I say the equivalent of Kol Nidre. I'm never going to do that again. No chance. I want to do that.
Well, so this is, I think, the under the story, which is here. How do you take such an important person within his own, country, his own milieu, his own, ethnic group, and say to him, be one of us, without honoring who he was. Now again, I do fault Moses here for tact and diplomacy. And I do wonder whether or not he really wanted. I think there's a tremendous ambivalence here about Moses. Moses loves his father-in-law, was mentored by him, certainly had a wonderful relationship with him, and it was but having him around will also be a bit of a burden to him. And while he tries to make him an offer, it's not an offer he can't refuse because he refuses the offer. And
Yeah.
and while this story doesn't end with the postscript, he went and sent him away. What you're saying, you're using Jeremy, you're using Rashi here. Rashi in Exodus, chapter what was it, chapter 18?
18. Yeah, it's the last
Yeah.
verse in 18.
So Rashi conflates the two stories and says, it was here that Moses sent him away, and we never hear from him again. And okay, that's the way biblical stories end. Yeah.
But I think the later story in the Parsha, the one that involves Miriam and Aaron, suggests that what Moses really sees as the burden is being Moses. That the burden is this close communion with God, which comes at a very heavy price for him.
Well, that's
His
a good segue.
brothers, his brother and sister see it as a prize to be able to have this communion with God. And Moses, perhaps because of his humbleness, understands that it's not a prize, it's a burden. And I think because this is how I'm looking at the story, that he would have welcomed Yitro, who has already demonstrated that he knows how to share the burden.
Yitro, Moshe, the prize and the burden is interesting. Uh, we have seen presidents of the United States who clearly think that this is an act of service to the people, or Medinat Yisrael, or any country, but political leaders who take it as an act of service. And I can think of a couple of people who seem to take it as a prize. And and um, and I kind of want people, Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelko ki eved ne'eman karata lo. We say in the liturgy on Shabbat, uh, Moshe was happy with his lot in life, for you have called him faithful servant. I kind of want political leaders, national leaders, to feel that there's not that it's a burden in the sense of I wish I wasn't doing it, but the key thing, the ennobling thing is the responsibility, not the perks.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I kind of want that. But Moshe, I would say the two examples, Barry, that you referenced, I would say that we get both sides of Moshe, not the prize versus the burden, but the one who does. This, by the way, is my advanced shout out to Jonas Weissman, whose bar mitzvah is on Saturday.
Nice.
This is his Dvar Torah about Moshe in the episode of Eldad and Medad, realizing that this is a team sport, and I need their help. In Exodus 18, where Yitro has to conk Moshe over the head and say, "Buddy, you can't do this all by yourself. You need some help." But either way, the two stories are about in fact, leadership as a cooperative and collaborative kind of thing, as opposed to, just one big superstar being in charge.
So talk about that for a second, because I think, we had this offline, which was, there's a theme that is running through this Parsha, and perhaps, the book itself, which is the theme of leadership, models of the way God speaks, and we get different examples of that. And the previous example of Moshe and Yitro is all about, how a people is led because he pitches to Yitro that he should be his scout. But the story that you referenced just before, which is the not the conflict, but the challenge or the questions that were raised by Moses' siblings, okay? And that already is in chapter
Well,
12. But to the Ber Miriam Aaron Moshe, they speak about his Cushite woman, his wife, all right? And then we get here's the beautiful prompt, verse 3, Va'ish Moshe anav me'od mikol ha'adam asher al pnei adama. And it led in with verse 2, Harak b'Moshe diber Adonai, hello. That's their question. Did God only speak to them? And so we get this idea that there's one quality of Moses that truly makes him the singular character of the Bible, and that is humility. And so, and respond to that or react to that in light of these different stories, including the story of Moses and Aaron and the story of Eldad Medad, the prophesiers in the camp, and humility as the singular um, attribute of a leader.
So I wonder if that actually is what makes Moses superhuman, that he was more humble than anyone else in the world. And I'm reminded, with all due respect to the party involved, that when the chant first came in the Lubavitch movement, Yachim Melech HaMashiach, long live the King Messiah, I thought the proof that the late Reb Schneerson was not the Messiah is that he couldn't say this is ridiculous. That even he, as gifted a spiritual leader as he was, got swept away because everyone wants to think in some way that they could be the Messiah.
By the way, let's as we're recording this now in June of 2025, the recent book by Jake Tapper and the other person, whoever wrote that, what's it called? Original Sin, or something like that. About nobody walks away from the presidency, and Joe Biden, despite his, as we now know, manifest, uh,
Infirmities.
deficits, he couldn't walk away, and the Lubavitch Rebbe is. I like your way of saying it. Like the actual Mashiach would say, no, 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 I'm not the Mashiach. But humility. I mean, I think of this on a number of ways. Like we all know people who are super impressed with themselves, but what was it? Socrates said, I know enough to know how little I know. I know enough to know that I know nothing, or I understand enough to understand that I know nothing. And and I think that this is perhaps on a mystical-ish kind of way. If Moshe Rabbeinu could, and this is Maimonides' claim, Moshe Rabbeinu had the access to the theoretical maximum of human understanding. That he understood what there was to be understood, and the things that he could not understand are simply beyond human ken. And I wonder if the humility is like you think that whoever, right, the Rav Soloveitchik is the smartest and wisest person in the world. If you were as wise as Rav Soloveitchik, you would understand how little he really understood, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu, if he understood everything that a human being could about God and humanity in the world, and he would say, and I realize that that is just a drop in the bucket.
Do you know the American archetype of humility is Abraham Lincoln, and you know, always in the biographies of Lincoln, there's always a reference to his humor, his self-effacement, um, his stature, uh, and it's hard to believe that Lincoln didn't know that he had tremendous rhetorical, oratorical gifts. It's hard to believe that he wasn't aware when he was writing the Gettysburg Address that he knew how to write a sentence. He knew exactly what he was doing. But but he pulls it off, and he becomes, I think, the ultimate model in the um, American lore of the humble leader. In a way, he's the American analog to Moses. If it's Ha'ish Moshe Anav Me'od, it's also the Abraham Lincoln Anav Me'od. He was,
Yeah, right. I mean, okay, I understand this is not the same thing at all. And we're not
yeah,
talking about religious leadership, and we're not talking about, the deep virtue. of knowing your place in the cosmos. But I must say, I like sports and I like music. Um, I even, thanks to my children, have a good appreciation for some really great hip hop artists. Uh, and athletes and hip hop artists, maybe other kinds, there you will not find humility.
Among certain athletes, I mean, Canadian athletes are very humble. At
Well,
least
they have much to be humble about.
they used to be. No,
But I mean, in a certain sense, you don't get to the NBA if you don't think that you're the best. I mean,
well,
you,
that was Ali. I think Ali gave that to American sports. I think and Ali, it was part of the game for Muhammad
But
Ali.
he also could carry it off
He carried it off.
because he was the best.
he really
Oh,
was the
but
best.
yeah, he raised that to an art form.
I bet you if we dug a little bit deeper, we would find some people in those areas because it partly needed to psych yourself up, and you're partly. But we can think about other artists, Picasso and Norman Mailer, and they were like massive egomaniacs. And I guess it played into their success too. And in this social media age, where all you want is more attention, more attention, more attention, more eyeballs, which is really kind of disgusting. Like it seems that there's a reward for being, an obsessive egomaniac, and the true deep virtue is not being an egomaniac. The true
Well,
deep
because I
virtue
think people are
is,
confusing two things. You need a certain amount of ambition in order to succeed in life, but that doesn't mean that you can't have humbleness as well. And since we were talking about Lincoln, one of the things that impresses me is he would get on the floor to play with his kids. And you can't imagine a lot of presidents would continue to do that once they became president. But you don't have to give that up. It depends on really what kind of person you are at heart. And it's the same with the performers that you mentioned. You don't have to be a megalomaniac in order to be a successful performer, but you do need a healthy ego. And a healthy ego doesn't mean you have no ego, just like it doesn't mean you have an outsized ego either.
well, a healthy one is proportional.
Yeah.
So Moses, I can remember, our late teacher, Rabbi Simon Greenberg, talking about this,
Big Lincoln fan.
and he was a big Lincoln fan and a big Moses fan, and he basically said exactly
And
what
he
you.
was a big Simon fan too.
No,
He's a big Moses fan. He liked Moshe Rabbeinu.
he did
And
not.
Moshe Greenberg, his
He did
son.
not understand humility as being as cowering. He under I mean he's and we've said this before. He always, used to walk very straight, and when he saw people like me slouching or whatever, he would kind of say, "You got to stand, come a miut." That was very important to him because of this understanding of humility. That humility is not about, faking it, okay? That is to say, oh, no, no, like whining, that kind of, no, no. Humility was having a healthy sense of ego and knowing that the world still doesn't depend on you.
Yeah.
Being able to put it into perspective, which, I think is a remarkable gift of Moses, at
Well,
least.
that's what we do week in and week out.
Well, we think that we're so important because we are, we're up to about 70 views on YouTube, which has billions of views. So we know where our humility lies. But in the meantime, this is a good way to bring our conversation to a conclusion. And in humility, we want to thank everyone who's watched and listened to us. We're honored by that, truly. It means a lot to us that we are part of your conversation or part of your entertainment, depending depending on how you look at this and how you relate to this. And once again, praying for the speedy release of the hostages, thinking of everyone, and wishing a beautiful Shabbat as we conclude this week. Let everyone have a beautiful Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
This week on Parsha Talk. Bye bye.